Okay, so we can start. So first, thank you for coming, everybody. I really didn't think I was going to do this because like I didn't thought people would be interested in this, but nice that people are, and nice that I also can share a little about something that I used to do before, because normally we're dealing with. So David can teach us a lot about programming. Trey can teach us a lot about everything, and yeah, actually, so I have something to share, and yeah, thank you for taking part on it. Oi. This is the hearing. Oh shit! Can't I just make it? Yeah, better. Yeah, no, I didn't know that this was actually appearing. Now it's better. Yeah, okay. So yeah, the idea when I prepared this short presentation was like, who is this for? What are we going to talk about today? So first, for people who want to understand how academia work, we're going to talk a little bit about it. People who want to understand how scientific research works, because that has a lot to do with essays and papers. Then people who want to learn how to write better essays, and then it's more about the rules and techniques, and this actually the boring part, in my opinion. And people who want to learn how to use the referencing system, and then it's a little more specific about CGL. So here we go. We start with Academia Wonderland. Yeah, so many people sometimes ask, why do we have to write the essays, or why do we have to do this kind of work? I came here to learn, let's say, to code, or I came here to practice my art skills, so why I end up doing this? And the answer to all these questions is actually just one, which is science. So the main goal of academia, and when we're talking about academia, we're talking about universities, and here in Germany also what they call Hochschule. So all these institutions have as their goal to produce and contribute to science. And while being a part of it, so when we're students, being on a master, on a PhD, or on an undergrad students, which is our case, you are also acting as a scientist. So every one of us is a little bit of a scientist while we're doing it. And as a scientist, that's part of the work. I'll explain more later, but that's basically the main reason why we have to write essays and write this kind of research papers. And then we go to Aristotle. Yeah, why Aristotle? The whole thing, and this is actually the first point, because later on when we go to the essays exactly, so every time we write an essay, somehow it seems that Aristotle ends up involved, like with Mundell last semester, and the other semester he talked a lot about him, and there's actually a reason for that. So Aristotle is a philosopher, of course, but he was not just a normal philosopher in the sense that he was not only thinking about stuff that were out there. He was the guy who decided what were the stuff out there. He was the first guy in history who started to organize knowledge and say, this is mathematics, this is physics, this is history. He actually had books defining which of those things and what they were. And then every time you're going to research something, and this is already a tip. So when we're talking about, oh, I don't know, scholarly references for this, who to look for, Aristotle is always the first one to look for, because he was the first one to organize it. So if you have a name of a science, or if you have a name, one of those big things in humanity, like art, like science, like history, Aristotle will have a good definition about it. So this is why we always go to him. And about what we're talking here today, he actually also has a definition on that, on science, on knowledge. And he divided that in three. And the importance to understand why they're divided in three is also to understand how universities work. So the first one of them would be what was called episteme, or episteme in Greek. That's scientific knowledge. So it's universal, meaning that the same knowledge you have here can be applied in China, can be applied in the United States, can be applied anywhere in Venus if you go to Venus. and does not depend on the context. So it seeks for the truth, and then many philosophers later will discuss what truth is, but mainly it seeks for the truth in knowable objects. And knowable objects is important because it has to be something everybody knows. So you can't research unicorns because they're actually not there for you to research. So they're not unknowable objects. But maybe you could research what was written about unicorns, because that we know a lot of people wrote about unicorns. There are games about unicorns, and that you can research. So always knowable objects. That's episteme. Then there's technique. That's empiric knowledge, and it's the knowledge you got from experience and craftsmanship. It's everyday knowledge, and as you see, technique like sounds like technique, and it's like the same word only in Greek, because for example, in the next class, when we do like this practice stuff, it's all technique. So it's also important. It's also a part of knowledge, as we're seeing here. And I think many of us come to look for this. So this is a very important part of everything we do. It's like the practical knowledge we will need, for example, to work later. And then there's phronesis, which is wisdom. This is not so important for us here, I'll just mention, but it's like about ethics and virtue. It's like, why do you act the way you act? It's the result of practical knowledge, in the sense that when you learn how stuff works, you gain wisdom and you tend to behave better. It has more to do with, for example, people who study law, or people who study community services or social services. It's more linked to that, so we're not going to focus on that. And then, why did I talk about these three things? Because a full academic experience, meaning the way you can enjoy university the most, should include the three types of knowledge. And they're represented here today by what we do, by research, which is episteme, and research includes the essays and the papers and everything. By teaching or learning, in our case, because we don't get to teach, but we learn, and that's technique, and that's what we do like in workshops and stuff with practical knowledge. And extension. And extension here, also, we don't get to take a big part of it, but what we do, for example, in the work groups in CGL, it's considered by the university extension. So every time you're doing something for the community, or you're giving back to the community that's educating you, that can be considered extension. And this would be like the full academic experience we're talking about here. And then we talked about going for the truth, or pursuing truth. And now we're going to really talk about it. And then we're focusing on episteme, which is the main part about the essays and the research we're talking about here. And I didn't read the other quote, but this one, I think it's kind of interesting to read. Is the truth is rarely pure and never simple. And this is true, but this is also an advantage for us. So I would like just to start with this question: what is true, or what is the truth for you guys? So,
do we need to answer?
What?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, truth is, that's a philosophical question.
Yeah, it is.
It's it's a thing that you can prove in some way, I'd say.
Oh, that's a nice answer from what is coming. But yeah, nice. Someone else wants to say something? Okay,
maybe
we
in the
can
same
just...
vein, something that can't be overruled.
This is interesting, and it has directly to do with what comes next. Like what Trey said, we're going to use, but what you said, we will have to use. So this thing in French here, you're going to understand why I use. It means this is not the truth, and it's because of this painting that some of you might know from Magritte. So this painting, what are you seeing there?
Technically, it's a pipe.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I see a pipe.
Yeah, most people do. I do too. And then he wrote there, like, this is not a pipe. And The whole thing about it is that it's really not a pipe, it's the representation of a pipe or the painting of a pipe. And this, of course, he was playing with this on art, but this also happens to science. And then this is why I go back to the quotation I used in the beginning, that truth is not so simple, because this actually also happens with the truth. And this is what science is about. And in my opinion, it's when science starts to become really interesting, because when we think about science, we normally think about stuff that are there and they're consolidated, and somehow it has to do with it. So things that can be proved, like Trey said, but actually when Neil said, oh, those are things that cannot be override or overridden, it's actually not true, because those are things that can be shifted all the time, as strange as it might seem. And here comes why. So there's this guy called Bachelard. This is not as common as Aristotle. I'm just bringing him here because it has to do with research, and we're not going to study his theories or anything. But he has this book called The Formation of the Scientific Mind, exactly about this. So remember when we talked about Epstein in Aristotle. So there's a whole science called epistemology, which is the study of knowledge and how knowledge is produced. And this guy here, the Bachelard, is one of the main epistemologists in the world. And wait, someone just joined here. Oh, how do I go back one slide? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now they're working. They were just. So yeah. And the first thing. So epistemology is the study of knowledge and knowledge production. Is what I just said. And Bachelard is one of the main epistemologists we know. And then there are paradigms, and this is what you were talking about, Niels. And so they shift. And this is the first important thing for us to understand, because sometimes when we were talking about the essays, or not even the essays, when we were in the reading groups, I saw a lot of people bringing questions like, but wait, is it like this or is it like that? It's confusing. And sometimes the problem is in science, it can be both, because science and therefore the truth is alive. It changes. It's exactly like the butterfly thing. So what is considered true today might be amplified or even denied tomorrow. A very simple example we have is like the flat earth thing. So that was considered scientific truth until someone showed it was not. But there are more subtle things. So for example, the whole notion of Newtonian physics that is still true. So the three laws of Newton can still be applied and are still used for engineering. But since Einstein had the relativity theory, that was also like regionalized somehow. So the Newtonian physics still exists, but they only serve to study things on Earth and in places where gravity works the way it works. Because if you go to the outer space, actually you would have to use Einstein's theory. And this idea that truth can always be amplified and changes all the time is very important when working with science. Because, for example, when you choose an author or when you choose something to cite, you have to think why you're using it and how is the context where you're using it changing, because you might be saying something that you yourself will contradict later. So this is why it's important, and why we have to have it in mind every time you write something scientific. And then why is research important? So why should I care about all this research part when I came here for, again, the technique, for the practical part? Because the thing is, research, writing these essays, reading these papers and reading these books can take us from empiric to scientific knowledge. And with that, we can shift the paradigms. So of course, this will not happen out of the blue. It involves a lot of dedication and stuff, but if you really hit a nerve, if you really find something on these essays that are important or that are fundamental to the technique, You might change the way, for example, we make something in games, or you might change the way we make something on art, because the shifts on paradigms always come from episteme. They always come from scientific knowledge. So yeah, if you take it on the practical side, and you have people, for example, in computer sciences working with hardware, the new hardware that comes, for example, in the new PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series, in the new PCs and everything, those were scientifically developed before they could come to something that could be manufactured. So that's pretty much the idea and the importance of it. And this is also why, when writing those essays and writing this stuff, we should really go for the last thing that are made and get ourselves in the front of the process, because even as an undergrad student, you might be able to do some contributions, especially in game studies, because like when Gundolf says that this is a new field and this is starting now, actually what he kind of means, and we should get from that, is that since it's so new, there's few scientific things produced, and we can be the first ones to do it, especially here because of him and because of Bjorn. So we should take this opportunity if we like that, because it can really shift some paradigms in the industry in the future, but in academia for sure. And then research materializes and makes itself available through written media. And this is why research papers, essays, transcripts. So the same way that an idea might take place in a 3D model, or an idea might take shape in a code. In the case of science, it always takes shape in research paper, essays, transcripts, this kind of stuff. Those are the deliverables when it comes to science, and this is why they're so important. And then we start to get to the actual things. So what is the difference between an essay and the research paper? And this is important because, for example, when we have to do Sonia's essay, and that was called an essay, I did a research paper, which was not a problem. I even asked her if it was possible, and she said yes, because actually what I want is like a paper. And especially because here in Germany, like the main speech is not, the main language is not English, this tends to get even more confusing. So get into the facts and the names of the stuff, because we might have to do research papers in the future. For example, our thesis is sure to be a research paper and not an essay. What are the differences among them? So let's start with the essay. An essay is always conceptual. And by conceptual, I mean, the idea of the essay is to discuss, and we talked about shifting paradigms, is about shifting concepts, never facts. And this is why, for example, Walter Benjamin's thing that we read this semester is an essay, because he's basically discussing ideas, he's discussing concepts. And this is what an essay normally does. It's subjective in the sense that normally when you write an essay, you're talking about things that you've lived through. And this has to do with empiric knowledge. It has to do with the technique we talked about. So for example, if in the future, Trey decides to write something almost like a journal about modding, and use this experience to say, like, for example, modding can be the new way to, I don't know, learn how to make games, this can be an essay, and this is subjective because it's not like something taken from a scientific method or anything, but it's also important because he's presenting a concept. So this would also fit on an essay. It's personal, so normally when writing an essay, people write we or I or in first person. It's almost poetic. So if you take Nietzsche, for example, most of his essays are very poetic. He even uses like metaphors and stuff like that, and essays allow you to do that. So it's not a problem. In an essay, you show an opinion or a position. So normally you would say, I think it's better this way, or I think this doesn't work, or this could be done like that. And it's not a problem. You're supposed to do that in an essay because, again, you're proving a concept. You're proving an idea. And then you have to show what's behind that idea and why you're doing it. And an essay not necessarily requires methodology. And this is when it starts to get complicated in CGL, because sometimes when people say they want an essay, they mean they want a paper. Because in an essay, not necessarily you will have to come up with a methodology. So many people asked when doing Sonia's essay, do I need to do a survey? Do I need to like talk to a lot of people, interview? And no, because that would be only required if that was a research paper. Being an essay, you don't need to use methodology. It's not a main part of an essay. Only if you want. You can add it, but it doesn't require. And then for a research paper, and then this is something we still didn't do, but we're sure to do in the future. Like I said, thesis normally is a research paper. It has to be, so while essay is conceptual, this has to be factual, meaning that everything you say on a research paper has to be proven, has to be documented somewhere, even if you documented it yourself. So it has to be based on facts. There's not a chance that you could bring a concept that you invented to a research paper. So therefore, it's objective, meaning that normally you wouldn't write objective and impersonal, they're both together. So first, you're not writing about yourself, about your experience. It's not empirical, it's not technique. Here's episteme again. So you will talk about science and scientific facts, and normally impersonal. Today, it's not really a problem if you write I or we on a research paper, but normally, for example, in German, people would write kann man or muss man. And in English, it is known or it is well known, because it tries to be impersonal to the most. The idea is that you're really trying to get to the pipe here and not to the painting of the pipe. Of course, it's still going to be just the painting, but the idea of a research is to get the closest possible to the pipe. It's the pursuit of the truth we talked about before. A research paper shows a result or a fact, and this is really important because it's actually the reason why a research paper gets published. So for example, if someone finds a vaccine for COVID right now, this will come out in a research paper. They will publish like on Nature or Science or one of those big journals, a research paper showing how they found the vaccine and like what's the way to get there. And this is what a research paper does. So in our field, for example, games, when we're looking for that or when we're writing that, it's probably because we discovered something, like we hit a spot that it's important for academia or for the industry, like for someone. And this is why you write a research paper normally, or why you try to write, because you might be trying to get there. Maybe you don't get there, but then you publish to show this was not the solution and why, because then when researching, people will know, okay, this is not the way to go. This also works. And this requires strict methodology. I'm going to talk more about it later, but the whole idea is that when we talk about episteme, like the science being universal, it's exactly that. It can be reproduced anywhere in the universe if necessary. And this is why it requires methodology, because then people can reproduce. In the case of the vaccine, for example, even if you're not in that laboratory, or even if you're not in that, I don't know, company, if that's a company, you can still make the vaccine by reading the paper. Of course, that might be copyrighted or like have intellectual property, and then you can't for that reason, but the way to do it should be available there. And what does an essay and research paper have in common? Since we talk about the differences, what they both have. So they both use academic rigor. We're going to talk about what that is later. They both have a clear format, and we're also going to show this format. They both depend on scholarly references and sources. That's different from methodology. So you don't need to do like surveys for essays, but you still will need the scholarly references and sources. And they're both are spreading knowledge. I put the mushrooms here for two reasons. First, because I really like this botanical, scientific aquarellas, the watercolors. This was really common, especially in 19th century, because it was the only way they had to represent nature. So this is art today, but back then this was scientific. And again, you have like a shift of paradigms there, but also because mushrooms spread themselves in the forest in a way that not only they're like copies of the same organism, but sometimes scientists found out, and this is another shift of paradigm, they're actually the same individual. So different mushrooms in different parts of a forest are actually doing different functions for the same macro fungi organism. And this is a little bit how by writing essays and papers, science works, because in the whole world, people are producing knowledge in different ways. But if we all have this big database, this big knowledge base comprised by the papers everybody writes, we're working a little bit like these mushrooms here. So what is this academic rigor I talked about? It's a common standard or common practices to minimize interference in knowledge transfer. So tools that we can use to get as close as possible to the pipe, although we're still just a representation, and that is good because it can shift later, but it's like tools that will get us the closest we can to the actual pipe, to the truth. So academic rigor is composed by, first of all, scientific method. And this is really important because a lot of people I was talking to were like, I have no idea where to start with this essay thing. Like, what should I write about? And actually, there's a method to do that. It's a scientific method. This is especially for research papers, but this also works for essays because it's one of the things they have in common. So first of all, you have to ask a question. And normally, asking this question means finding something you like. So for example, I know many of us have personal projects. If this question comes from this personal projects, it's even better. So it's something you know and you will be able to investigate better. So ask a question. It has to be a sincere question. Really try to find something out. You will find ways to do that while writing, but first of all, ask this question. Once you have it, you find what we call the state of the art. State of the art means everything people have already written, talked about, but like scientists have done about it. So let's say the question I ask is about COVID and the vaccine. So what I would do is go to every scientific journal, to every book written about vaccines, all the things, and try to understand how it was in the very past. So like how vaccines were invented until the point like what they have written this year about the COVID vaccine. That's the state of the art. I have a pool of stuff there where I can choose the best ones for me. In this phase, normally you just gather stuff you already read in your life, and this is why it's important when you ask a question to take something from something you like because you've already read about it. Don't try to invent the wheel again. Just take it from something you know. So you already read a lot about that, so you have that stuff. You don't have to read it again. And the stuff you find, you know, the abstracts that we find on Google Scholar, for example, or the introduction in books, you only need to read that because now you're just collecting stuff that you're going to use. So you file everything up and then you have the state of the art. With that, you can build a hypothesis. And building a hypothesis means you're going to take all this state of the art that you find and you're going to say, okay, I already know, for example, that the vaccine cannot be, I don't know, with antibodies. And I already know that the vaccine cannot be produced in cold environments. So I am going to ask myself if I can produce the vaccine without antibodies in a controlled environment. And that's why you have to have the state of the art so you can build your hypothesis. It can be a simple thing. The only thing it cannot be is that normally people ask the question already with the hypothesis, and this is like a trap. Don't fall in that trap, because what happens is, oh, my question is I'm going to see if gamers are harassed when playing online. If your question involves an if, you are going to prove it, even if it's not true, because it's a bias. So never bring a hypothesis in your question. Like, ask really a question. Ask what, ask who, things like that, and then you build your hypothesis, because otherwise you're just going to prove something that's not true just because of bias. And how do you do that? You test your hypothesis with an experiment or a methodology, and then this has to do with scientific paper, and this you wouldn't have to do with an essay, because this is really when you get the survey, when you do like a social experiment, when you go to a game and try to change the code in the way you said you could do. It's really an experiment. Here, it's when you take the scientific to the empiric to see what's going on there. Then you analyze the results you get. For example, if it's a survey, you get all the numbers and you like consolidate those numbers. You infer conclusions from there. So once you have those answers, once you have the experiment you made in the game, once you have anything you decided, you can draw some conclusions from it. And this is where you do it. This is actually the part of the paper called conclusion itself. And then once you have all that, you publish your results or you rebuild your hypothesis, because it can happen that when you analyze your results, that you draw the conclusion that your hypothesis was wrong. And then people would say, oh my God, I spent the whole semester writing my thesis and my hypothesis was wrong. What should I do? You should publish it, first of all, because for other people, like I said, it can be important when they build their state of the art to know that that hypothesis is false. And this is already a contribution to science. But also, if it's something you really want to prove, like you really want to get to the bottom of it, you really want to know how to do this or that, you can rebuild your hypothesis around this fail that you just had and do the process all over again. So you have both alternatives, and none of them are better than the other. It's only two different ways of taking the scientific method to a result. And here you have the methodologies. This is like ways you have to test your hypothesis. And so this is why when scientific method is a thing and methodology is another. Methodology is the way you test your hypothesis. It can be quantitative or statistics survey. This is what many of us did for Sonia's essay, for example, but many of us did for other stuff. It's basically putting up a survey and sending it to people so you have numbers. So you can say 30% of people don't like RPGs, or 50% of people prefer to play games of action, this kind of stuff. You have qualitative research or interviews, and those are, you're not going for the amount of people you talk to, but you're going for specific points. So normally those interviews are when you're talking to like experts on something, or when you're talking to people who can really contribute to your research for some reason. So let's say you're researching harassment in gaming communities, as we said before. You might want to interview 3 or 4 people who got harassed, but like really in a representative way. Those people are probably not going to be identified. I don't know how it's going to work. But then you do these long interviews so you can quote these people to explain, for example, as a psychologist, how this is affecting their lives. And this is like a methodology as well. It's qualitative research. You can do bibliographic research, and this is specific for essays. So since essays don't need to use all the apparatus to test stuff, you can do bibliographic research. This means you're going to read everything that's out there about this, and then you're going to put the stuff together like as a conversation, as if you were writing the script for a documentary. So for example, if you're talking about modding, again, that's something that Trey does. You get an author that says that modding doesn't, I don't know, it's good for the intellectual property because it amplifies intellectual property. And then you get another author that says, no, this is actually bad because it circumscribes what people create to a certain engine and to a certain intellectual property, and people are not free to create what they would be actually free to create in other environments. And then you get, and then with all these opinions together, you draw your conclusion. This is bibliographical research, and this we can do for any essay because it's, let's say, simpler to do than the other things. You can do a social experiment. This is a little more complicated, especially for us in games, but a lot of people do this in the social sciences and stuff like that. So for example, you put a lot of people in a room and you have this situation going on that is going to test your hypothesis. I don't know if you ever saw, like there's this documentary about authoritarian governments and how they influence people, that people have to press a button to give a shock to a person in the other room. It's like the person is an actor, so they're not actually getting shocked. But the whole idea is to show that when people have some figure of authority telling them, press the button, most of the people end up doing it. So this is a social experiment. This can also be done as methodology. Ethnography, and ethnography is sometimes interesting for us. It comes from anthropology, and it means that you are going to insert yourself in a group and try to understand how that group works and what are their beliefs and what do they do. It's almost like writing a chronicle about being in that group. So I talked about anthropology because just to give an example, if you want to do an ethnography about Hare Krishnas, for example, you would kind of become yourself a Hare Krishna. You don't have to, but like you would have to hang out with them a lot. You would go to the places they go. You would eat with them. You would dress like them. And then after, let's say, 2 months, you would be able to write an ethnography to show people an external look on what Hare Krishnas are and how they behave and what they do. A lot of people do that in online stuff. So, for example, what Cheryl Turkle did a little bit was what they call netnography, which is an ethnography that you do online. And this is also a very interesting methodology, especially for people working with online communities. And if we were like nature sciences, like physics, yeah, of course. All of this you can use for both of them, because the thing is, essays doesn't require any of those. So you can write an essay just using bibliographic research or ideas from other people, and that's okay. But for example, bibliographic research is a methodology you can always use for essays, and it's simple to bring and will not harm your paper in any way. So if it's an essay, I would also go for something between discussing a concept and bibliographic research, because it's a safe place to go. But if you have to write a thesis or anything on a research paper, then you have to choose one of those. And yeah, and laboratories, as I was going to say, is more for the natural sciences. So it's really a laboratory experiment. For example, if you're dealing with chemistry, if you're dealing with physics, and yeah, laboratory. And then comes the blank page syndrome. So if you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. The reason I'm saying that, not the thing that reading will make you write better, although we know it's true, but mainly because for academic papers, you really have to read. So every time you don't know what to write about a topic, normally it comes from the fact that you never read someone writing scientifically about it. And this is why, first of all, we have to know what we're talking about. And knowing what we're talking about in an academic, in an academic sense, means reading what people have been doing about it academically. So, for example, and this is really important, and this is really a tip that I give. Every syllabus that we get, especially syllabus from things that ask for essays in the end, have a bibliography in the end. Like they have the references of the course there. Read those references. If you find that some of them are boring or some of them doesn't interest you, you don't have to read all of it. But just read the introduction or just read the abstract, because that is going to be useful when you write the essay. It's almost like a rule. Like they're not there just by chance or just to show that the professor read that. They're there because they are going to be useful somehow. So this also comes here. Know what other scientists talk about it. This is important. Know the theoretical basis you want to analyze it. So this is like not so important now, but from the thesis on, especially if people decide to do a master or stuff like that, this is like fundamental. Why? Every author or everyone writing for scientific purposes have a theoretical basis. And you cannot have like conflicting theoretical bases together. It's like it's the talk I was having with, I think, Simon and Derek on Discord the other day. This is like writing C# on Unreal. It won't run. Once you get to the point that you have to present your thesis, you're going to be shredded if you do that. So, for example, you have authors that are what we call like scholastic realistic. That's the case for Aristotle. and you have authors that are like a social construction, and those are just a second, because I think someone is trying to join. No, it's okay. Yeah, this social constructive guys, and like what they say philosophically comes from opposite. What is going on here? Oh, it's a chat. Okay. Oh, okay. Trey needs to head out. Okay. Yeah. So when those theoretical bases conflict to each other, and you have to present it, they shred you. Like it's really like writing the wrong language in the wrong compiler. It's a problem. So right now, it's not something you have to worry about, because this is not going to happen to us in an essay or in a paper we write now. But just have in mind, once you start to read more, once you start to get to know those authors, that you have to know where they're coming from. So and there are even like a simpler example. So if you're writing about harassment, or if you're writing about toxicity in gaming communities, you don't want to bring an author that actually defends that, unless it's to contradict him or to show your opinion, because otherwise it's of course going to conflict with the rest of the paper. So this is why, know where the people are coming from. Don't take the things they say out of context, because this can really be a trap. And don't know the answers. This has to do with the if I talked about before, but don't know the answers you're searching for them, because if you already have them, you don't need to write an essay on it. So first of all, when you're looking for your question, really ask yourself a question that you would like to know the answer. Don't have the answer for it, because then you don't have to write a paper. You're just waste your time on that. Use the bibliography and the references the teacher assigned for writing. They expect that. So I already talked about it, about the syllabus and thing, but remember they expect that, because this is also important. So for example, when I talked to, I think it was Leo or Simon, about using the things in the syllabus, they were like, but really, can I do that? Won't they think that's kind of lazy because it was already there? And actually not. Like, being a professor, they expect you to do that, because those are the basic references for the essay they're asking you to do. So just go for those. You already have 5 or 6 there. Normally they ask for 3, so you already have everything you need. Don't be afraid to do that. Like, this is good. They like when you do that. Especially Gundolf, because Gundolf has written books himself, also Andre. So if it's for them, you can even use their own words on your essay. And some people try to do that, but oh, they said that on a lecture, and you actually, we're going to talk about it later, but you actually can't reference things people said on a lecture, but you can always go to their books, and what they say in the lecture is actually written in the books. So it's even easier. And read books. And this about reading books, it's because you're going to see later, a lot of people start to look for material for this stuff in YouTube, on Kotaku, and it has to be books. Like, there's a reason for that, and then we're going to talk about the reason, but it has to be books. It can be ebooks, it can be PDFs, it doesn't matter, but it has to be from books. So try to read books, try to read more, and read about all the topics that interest you. You don't have to read about only like CGL stuff. If you're a programmer and you like rogue environments, rogue type games, read about that the most you can. Then you can read, of course, in Kotaku, you can see YouTube videos, but try to find books about it and read them, because it will go in depth and with scientific rigor in stuff that you will need later. It will benefit not only your essays, but your whole life. Yeah, I got control again. So parts of the paper, this is also important, because this is basic structure, and some of those could be put off in some cases. Some of those don't need to be there, but like this would be a complete paper, both essay and research paper. They both have this structure. So first of all, introduction. Introduction, you can normally, I write introduction, colon, and then put a name to it. But if you only write introduction, it's always fine. So The title here is only to show that this is the first part of your paper. And then there, you tell why you're here and what you're talking about. Present your question. So it's the moment to say, this is a paper, I'm writing about this, this, and that, because of this, this, and that, and my questions are, no, 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 it's that. So you don't have to complicate that a lot. Of course, with more practical knowledge about it, you will want to like do some wordplay in the introduction. You are going to put some cool titles on that, and it's not a problem. You can do all that. But like what the professor or everyone who's reading is expecting from your introduction is exactly that. You're telling why you're there, what are your questions, and how you're going to solve it. Even because if someone is looking for the state of the art in their research, this is everything they're going to read from you in the first moment. So this is where they're going to say, okay, I have to read this later, like the whole paper, or no, I don't need to read this paper because it has nothing to do with me. So this is what the introduction is about. Then you go to the bibliographical review. And this is where you get to the state of the art. This is, you tell what has been written about the topic already, and you connect them to show your way from there. So it's, of course, when you're talking about the state of the art, you have to know everything that has been written, but it's like humanly impossible to read everything. But for example, if you take one of these big guys, one of this Aristotle, Bachelard, one of these guys, and they already cite everything that came before, that is already done. So you can put one of them there, and the person knows, okay, they're writing from this point. Then you show something more, okay, they're writing from this point, and then you show your how this talks to your questions, and how is it important to you. And then anyone reading will be able to say, oh, okay, so this is what they read, this is the theoretical basis they're using, this is good, I can go on reading this, and I know where, like, the way they're going. Or they might say, yeah, this is a nice work, the question has to do with what I need to answer, but they're going on a theoretical basis that it's not exactly what I will need here, so it's not important. So this is why the graphic review is important. It's when you say, Neil said that, Vanessa said that, David said that, Simon said that, and now from all that they said, I'm going to say that my hypothesis is, and then you present the hypothesis. This is basically the bibliographical review, and this is why it's important. It's like your route, your GPS route to where you're going to. Then, as I said, you present your hypothesis. And this has to be really simple. You don't need to, for example, from the introduction to the bibliographical review and the other parts here, you don't even need to write a subtitle like we did for introduction. Only if you want. You can just, for example, in the bibliographical review, already present your hypothesis. It only has to be clear that now you're presenting a hypothesis. So, you present it, or based on everything you read, we are allowed to test the hypothesis, or based on everything that was presented so far, we can assume that, and this is clear to everyone who's reading, that that's the hypothesis. Then, and this, for example, can be cut off if you're writing an essay methodology, because the essay will not use the methodology to test the hypothesis, or it will only use bibliographical review. So don't worry about the methodology if it's just an essay. If it's a thesis or if a research paper, then you might have to use it. And this is where you detail how and through which methods you are going to test your hypothesis. So it's where you explain if you're doing a survey and how the survey works, if you're doing a laboratory experiment and how it works. The thing here is this has to be really, really specific. You really have to describe how you got there to a point that people anywhere else in the world will be able to reproduce it. It's the part I said. So you should be able to do the same thing in Venus if that was necessary, but you should be able to. So here you describe everything. If you have like a questionnaire, put it on an attachment in the end of your paper and say here that people can find the questionnaire there. If you talk to 135 people, just say it's 135 people. Every information has to be available here in the methodology because people need to do what you did. Then you get to the results. which is you describe your experiment then, like how you did the experiment and the results you found. And finally, conclusion. You might note from here that introduction and conclusion are the only two parts that I would like have a subtitle on them, like introduction and conclusion. And this is because all the rest, so bibliographical review, hypothesis, methodology, and results are part of the development. They're like the body of your paper. So it doesn't matter how you name them. They're just elements that have to be there, but you don't have to name them and separate them from the main body. While the conclusion and the introduction are parts that you really might want to name, because they're parts that people looking for your paper or looking to build the state of the art of their research might go directly to. So they read the introduction and then they go to the conclusion, because the conclusion is where, given all you have written before, you draw your very own conclusion about it. And this is also important. In the conclusion, normally you don't have other references. You don't bring authors, you don't bring other references. You can even start a little bit with it, but like this is your own voice. This is the part where people who might want to quote you in their papers might draw from, because this is your own contribution. When we talked about shifting paradigms, if you ever shift any paradigm, it will come in the conclusion of your paper. So the conclusion is yours. This is the place you can talk with your own voice. So take the opportunity to do that. Any doubts about this parts? Because this is kind of important in the sense that, yeah, this is how an academic paper is formatted.
You normally would, the body of your paper, you would divide that into chapters. Am I right? Or
you can do that. So this is really free. You really have to do it like you feel better. What I did, for example, for Sonia's essay, because Sonia's essay, mine was a research paper. So I had the introduction, and it was like, as I said, introduction, colon, and I put a subtitle. And then I put like a random title for the whole body, which was like bibliographic review, hypothesis, methodology, and results. Those came under another title that I don't even remember, because it was a title that had to do with the research. And then I had conclusion, colon, and another subtitle.
okay.
But it's really up to you. You can also write, for example, bibliographic review, it's also not a problem. The only thing is it will sound a little like too formatted. So this is why like you can be loser on that, loser in the sense that like you don't carry too much. But the important thing is that all those elements have to be there. They have to be in place. So you have the paper. For example, if I was a professor correcting the paper, this would be one of my main criteria. I would see if all those elements are there. Unless like if it's an essay, I wouldn't look for methodology or results, because those are parts of the experience. But like introduction, bibliographic review, hypothesis, and conclusion, this is like the main format for every scientific paper we write. Is that okay? Okay, so just a second, because my thing sometimes freezes. I don't know why. Yeah, academic sources, and this is the scholarly references. So they are writings by experts in a field or science, and this is what we're looking for when we put everything together. They follow the academic rigor. They are peer-reviewed. They are edited, and almost always copyrighted. There's a reason for that, and I'm going to explain it. You know, all the debate going on in the world right now about fake news and everything. And you know that science is somehow, or until now, kind of immune to all of it. Why is that? And this here, so scientific rigor and academic sources are one of the reasons for that. So I know that this can sound a little bit elitist sometimes, and this is actually a discussion going on in academia right now, that it has some kind of elitism to it. And I know this makes things harder to write, but at the same time, they protect science in the sense that, like we said before, in the pursuit of the truth, this gets us closer to the pipe. This guarantees that we're not bringing flat earthers to academia, that lies will not be faced as science as they can be faced as news, which is what's going on right now. So what's going on with the scholarly resources, and what is a scholarly source, what is an academic source, what is not, and this is what we're talking about. So let's go. What is not an academic source? YouTube is not an academic source. Why? Because I can go on YouTube and put a video there, Niels can do that, Vanessa can do that, anyone basically can do that. And if anyone can do that and you don't have any kind of filter, you don't have someone to check that and say, yeah, this was made with scientific rigor, this had a methodology, this was all those criteria we just look for, then this is not science. Of course, it can be based on science, it might even be true, but it's not guaranteed as true in the system, the academic system, the academia world from the first part of the presentation we are talking about. So it cannot be used as reference. Anything somebody said on a lecture or a TED talk you have been or watched, unless it's transcripted and edited. So this means, oh, that thing Gundolf said in the lecture, or the thing Sonia said in the, no, this cannot be used because only you were there. This is restricted to a certain point in time where people don't have access to. Remember that even in Venus, you should be able to reproduce or consult the same sources. And you cannot, from Venus, go to a lecture that happened in CGL only for 40 people in August 2019. So unless a lecture has been transcribed and edited meaning that someone from an editor or publisher read that, selected the best parts and put it on a book or put it on a PDF or put it in something that was copyrighted, that can also not be used. Blogs, magazines, Medium, newspapers, those are also not academic sources, and there's also a reason for that. For the blogs and Medium, you can already imagine why. It's the same reason as YouTube, because anyone can do that. For the magazines and newspapers, you can actually think, well, but those are edited. There is someone there editing those texts, and those texts have some kind of control, which is true. But their control has to do with media. They have to do with news. So, for example, Der Spiegel, they have what they call an editorial line. And this is why in the beginning of every edition, you have an editorial, like the editorial letter, we say in English. I don't know how it's called in other languages, but this editorial shows what the editor thinks and how the texts on that edition or on that issue were selected or put out. This happens for every magazine and every newspaper. And normally it reflects a political opinion or it reflects a cultural opinion that has nothing to do with science or the pursuit of truth. So even if it's important, and even if you can use them sometimes as a source, they are not an academic source because they were not done with the purpose of looking for the truth, like most of those, and they don't follow the academic rigor because their main interest there is, for example, to investigate something that happened to a politician or to show an opinion of someone about something, but still they are not academical sources. Wikipedia or any encyclopedia. Wikipedia, same problem as YouTube, blogs, Medium, like anyone can write there, even if there's a mediation, it's a collective one, so it doesn't work. And actually any encyclopedia, and the reason for that is that normally encyclopedias, they're almost like dictionaries, only for like a broader purpose. So what you have in an encyclopedia, most of it was not tested or was not done according to academic rigor, or although they will only refer to stuff that were done like that. So what I would say is, again, it's like the newspaper and magazines. You can still use them as sources. They're only not academic sources or scholarly sources. They're also a good place to look for. So for example, you don't know the scientist who wrote about character construction, but you want to write about character construction. Then Wikipedia and encyclopedias might have all the references there. You might find 3 or 4 scientists that already have papers about it or books written about it, and go for those. And this is a good thing to do. But you can't be restricted to what's written there, because then it's also not an academic source. Works of fiction, and this is like obvious, why not? Like, they're fiction, so they can't be part of the pursuit of the truth unless they are your object of research, and we're going to talk about it later, or unless you want to quote them in an epigraph, that it's something we're also going to do. But they are not academic source. They are artistic, aesthetic, any other kind of source, but they are not academic source. And of course, social media. They also can be objects sometimes, but you can't use social media posts people did posted on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram as academic sources. So, any doubt about this part here, because this is also very important? No. So I'll move on to just a second because it's frozen again. But then we're going to talk about what is an academic source. Yeah, here it is. First of all, most important, so academic books and e-books as well. So when I talk about books, I don't mean it has to be paper. It's just like it has to be a book published by a publisher. So those are the best academic sources you can find most of the times, of course, if they are scientific or academic books. And you have plenty of them everywhere. You can also use scientific papers and essays published in scientific journals, like Nature, Science, like you have these big scientific journals all around, and Google Scholar is actually good to find those journals. And those papers have an advantage in the sense that they are written, they can also be essays, but they are written in the same format and way we are writing them. So this is actually nice because, wait, someone, Anton and David, you're having a problem with the slides, is that it? Niels, Vanessa, are you guys seeing the same slide as I am seeing?
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's okay. Now it worked. I think it's just a delay. So we can go on. Yeah, so the scientific papers and these essays, they have the same format that we will be using to write. So they're good not only because they can be used as scholarly sources, but also because we can learn how to write better essays and papers by reading them, because they're exactly the same thing we're doing. And they're done by like the top researchers and top scientists in the world, so it's even better. Papers published in conferences annals, they normally have what is called an ISBN. This is a little more complicated to understand what it is, but it's actually simple to use. So for example, when you have Clash of Realities, or when you have one of these big conferences like DIGRA, any conference like scientific conference, some of those publish in the end, it's like a small book or a catalog with the works that everyone presented there, normally scientific papers as well, just like the ones we write, like essays and papers. Those are under an ISBN. This means it's like an international code for books. It's a number. And then if they do so, they can be used as a scholarly source. So for example, if you send a paper to next Clash of Realities and the next Clash of Realities approve your paper, and after that you have those annals published, you can actually use your work as a scholarly source. And this is very important. Yeah, so Anton said that Gundolf is publishing Clash of Realities transcripts. So if that's happening, that can also be used, because this is like stored somewhere and people can consult it. So this is good. This is like the way you can turn these conferences into scholar material for you. And this is also important. This is the reason people still do conferences, because we were even having some discussions about it, Niels and I and some other people, about why they still do on-site conferences everywhere in the world. Even we found out that we can do them online, and this is one of the reasons, because if you have people there and you transcript what people say and you get everything they sent and build it into like the annals of that conference, this becomes a scholarly source. You're producing science with that. So part of producing science is also attending conferences and sending material to them. And this is why. Theses available for consultation in university libraries. This is also important, and we don't use it that much in CGL. So every time you write a thesis, be it a master thesis or a graduate thesis, in any university, it's filed in that university library and it's up for consultation from anyone. So if you're looking for something very specific in games or in programming, it might be available in CGL's library or in our library, so to say. And you can consult that. And that is a totally valid academic source. So we should use that because it comes from alumni, so it comes from people with experiences very similar to ours, but also because it's valid. If you do that, it's good for your work. Public domain scientific treatises and essays. This is very specific, but it's also easy to understand. So for example, Aristotle lived some time before Christ, like 800 something before Christ. Of course, his work is not copyrighted anymore. You can also go to a library, go to a bookshop and buy a book, but that book will basically, like, you're paying for the publisher, you're paying for the edition. But like the work of Aristotle is available in the internet anywhere, and you can find it easily. So you will still have to put there like the edition you're using. So normally it could be a PDF or something. But the main thing is if it's public domain, so if it's not copyrighted anymore, and that works for most of people who lived before the 17th century, yeah, you can use them without actually paying for them if you happen to find a free edition or something of sorts. So that's also valid, as long as it's something recognized and that you can refer to, because it's important to be able to refer to. You can use them as scholarly source. And transcriptions of conference of lectures that have been edited and published, which is what we talked about the clash, which is also what we use. For example, if you read Hegel's essay, that is not an essay, that's a conference that we use for the semester, that's a transcription, and that's why we're able to use it, because someone transcribed it and published it. So when that happens, you can use it. Everything fine until here as well? Like we talked about what's not, and now what it is. I don't know if it's clear to you. If it's not, you can always ask. But like what I really try to do here is to show that there's a big difference between these two types of references and how we should use them. So next slide. It's frozen for me too, so don't worry, guys. Yeah. So first of all, everything can be a scientific object, but not everything is a scientific subject. What does that mean? So, for example, we talked about social media and works of fiction. Those can be scientific objects, which means you can study them. So let's say you're studying, I don't know, Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is not a scholarly source. It's a work of fiction. So you can't use Lord of the Rings to prove a point in your essay, or you can just quote Tolkien there as an academic source. But maybe you're writing a thesis about how the Lord of the Rings influenced games, and then you have to show parts of the work. In that case, Lord of the Rings is being a scientific object. It's part of what you're studying. Of course, you can use it for that purpose. It's not a scientific subject, though. You're not bringing Lord of the Rings there to make a statement as another scientist would do, like you use Hegel, like you use Benjamin. You're bringing it there to analyze the same way a scientist would analyze, for example, a stone or a mushroom. So everything can be a scientific object. You can analyze everything or anything you want. This is not a problem. But scholarly sources are scientific subjects. They're other scientists, and those cannot be everything or everyone. So this is a very important difference to understand, because another scientific object. You might be analyzing, so as we said before, bullying in gaming communities, and then you use a lot of social media. You can bring like quotes from people harassing each other on a chat, like on Twitch chat, for example. Totally do that as a scientific object, but those are not subjects. So those are not other scientists. You're just analyzing something. Again, it's the same thing as a scientist analyzing a mushroom or a plant. So have that in mind, that there's a difference. So it's not forbidden to put Lord of the Rings or chat lines in your essay. It's only that they have to be there as something you're analyzing and not as a scholarly source, because scholarly source have to be necessarily other scientists or thinkers or philosophers or anything. And references are an integral part of your work. You can't just add them later. This is really important because I've been discussing this with a lot of people. So what they do is like they write the full essay and they say, oh, I'm just going to add the references later. Don't do that for two reasons. First of all, because as we said so far, writing an essay is a little bit like writing the script for a documentary. You don't shot your whole documentary and in the end you say, oh, now I'm going to add the interviews, because the interviews are actually what guides your documentary. They're the points where you turn your arguments, and when you say, oh, so thanks to what this person said, I can now understand that. It's the same for an article. So you have to think everything you're going to write on your essay or on your research paper already with the references. You have to think, oh, now I'm going to write a paragraph about, I don't know, figure drawing. Let's say you're writing about character creation, and then you say, now I'm going to write a paragraph about figure drawing because I can use that author that said something about it, and then it reinforces my, I don't know, argument that people should study figure drawing to create characters. It's only an example, but it has to be thought like that. It's not like you have everything written and then you just fit the authors there, because there are two problems with that. The first is your bias. You're just trying to fit the truth to what you think, and this is not how academic research works, because it's really transparent to people reading that you only put the authors there to fit a context, and they're not doing anything for your work. You just wrote something that you could have written without any of those. And the second, it's because this is the easiest way to get the conflicts we talked about with the theoretical basis, because if people know those writers, they will know that they were taken out of context. Because if you're only looking for a person that said, oh, you should study figure drawing, you might take that from someone who actually is against drawing at all and only works with, I don't know, procedurally generated art. But in that part that you took, they said, oh, it's important to use figure drawing. So don't do that, please. Think of the references before. When you do your bibliographical review, already have all the references like filed out to use them on your essay. Because if you just decide, oh, now I'm going to add the quotation and the references, the chance that it ends up a mess is like really, really, really big. And then we get to the name or the names of the games. And this is a little bit what we've been talking about. So learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. This is attributed to Picasso. Ooh. Just like water freezes at 0 degrees, anywhere in the world, your references, writing, and methods should be recognized by any other scientist, which is what we talked about, the whole thing that you should be able to do the same in Venus. Although in Venus, the water might not freeze at 0 degrees Celsius, and this has to do with the shift of paradigms we talked about. See, it's all connected. Referencing systems. So what are they for? They are common standards to make your references easily recognized by readers. So the whole idea, and this is the boring part in my opinion, so don't worry too much about it, but the whole idea of doing those referencing systems the way we do is that by looking at that, people can immediately know what you are using, where to find the same stuff if they need to. But this is like the only utility of it. And I see people stressing about it too much in the sense that like if we're going to be graded only by it, and it's not like it is. This is an important part to understand, that you know how to write an essay, but you can actually write a good essay without knowing the referencing system, because this is not the main thing here. But since it's important somehow, let's just take a look. The following examples are according to CGL's referencing system, and this is another thing. There are many reference systems in the world. You have Harvard, you have Chicago. In Brazil, you have like a national one that everybody is obliged to use, like the government has one. In some other countries, you have different for like different states. So it changes, and this is the first thing you have to understand. It changes a lot. So you, for example, if you send a paper to a conference in the United States, you might have to rewrite your references to that system, but it's only your references. Like the rest of the essay would be the same thing, and this is why this is not important. This is like if we were talking about unities in mathematics, for example, this is only converting miles to kilometers and kilometers to miles. But like the experiment and the rest is the really important thing. It doesn't matter if you're measuring them in miles or kilometers. And the differences among systems are small, and the main most important elements are always there. So let's take a look. This is like, what is the reference made of? And this is like CGL, again, a system. First part and most important is that big one here. That is the author or the authors. It's the first thing that people look, and especially for me, when I'm reading anything like a book or a paper, and I have a footnote, or sometimes this comes in the main body of the text, and I see a last name that I know, I automatically know where that author is coming from. So for example, if I'm reading a philosopher and they cite Kant or Aristotle, I know, oh, okay, those guys are from this kind of theory. They're talking about scholastic realism, which is what we talked before. So it's automatic, and this is why this is the first thing to come, because it sets your paper in a background that people will already know where it's coming from. Second thing, it's actually the book or the anthology, or like the place, the publishing place where where the author is. So for example, Maturana and Varela here, it's this book, Autopoiesis and Cognition. And it comes normally in italic. In CGL, it has to be in italic. And the thing is, most scientists have many books published. And if you're researching something specific, you have a great chance that you're going to use many books from the same author. And this is why it's important, because you will have many Maturana, but like the books will be different ones. And this is why it's important to refer to them. And it's in italic because then it's like detached or highlights from the rest of the reference. This is, there are two things that come together. So it's the city where that edition that you're reading has been published, and the name of the publisher. So the thing about the city, this is really specific from CGL. So most of the other systems, you only have to write the publisher. But in CGL and in some other systems, you also have to write the city where the publisher is. What I do is, if you open a book, let me see if I have this here, then I can show it to you. 1 second. So yeah, here, if you open a book, this first page here, this page, can you see it? Oh no, you can't, because you're looking at the presentation. So just 1 sec. Stop share, yeah. So this page here that every book has all that information. So if you look here, it says the place where the book was printed, the year it was printed, the edition we're talking about, the author, everything is here. So always when you, I'll share the screen again. Yeah. So always when you have a book in your hands, or an ebook or a PDF, go to that page and look for it, because especially in CGL, you will need the city, and it's not so easy to know the city where that publisher is. So you'll find all that information there. Also, which is also a possibility, you can Google the name of the publisher, and by Googling the name of the searcher, it also will say in each city or in each state that is. So it's basically that. And the importance of it, and not only it, but also the year later, is because some books, especially very old stuff like Aristotle, for example, they have been published like thousands of times. And when you say the page you're using, people will look for that page in that specific edition. So in the second edition, what you're talking about might be in page 10, but in the third edition, it might be in page 12. And this is why it's important to know the publisher and the date, because then you know exactly where to look for if you have the same edition in your hands. And if it's a different edition, you might have to look somewhere else. So this is why this is all important, because people can check what you're presenting as well. Again, it's like a mechanism of defense that academia has against fake information or things that are not really true or couldn't be used in that context. And here it's another thing, it's like more specific. So sometimes you're using, for example, we talk about the transcriptions of Clash or the annals of something like Clash of Realities. In that sense, you would have here, for example, Neil's name, the name of Neil's work, but this is not the book. Nobody will find that book to sell. They will find the annals of Clash of Reality. In that sense, you have to bring in, and then here you have the real name of the book, where that is, and the rest of the information. So the system is in CGL. You have to put the first work, the work you're using, in quotation marks in, and then it's not here like that in my presentation, because for some reason this reference couldn't be altered in PowerPoint. But like Illuminations here, which is the name of the book, would be in italic. And then this is available online. When it's available online, you can put online and the link. Only you have to remove the link format, which I also couldn't do here. So I wrote here the link format must be erased. So it shouldn't be highlighted or underlined, and it shouldn't be in a different font or blue or anything. It has to be in the same font as the rest. I just couldn't do it here in PowerPoint because PowerPoint can be sometimes stubborn. But the main idea here is that when you have these works on anthologies, you present the name of the work, then you have in, and then you have the rest of the reference, just like the references you had in many other cases. The pages here refer to the pages comprised by this main work. So the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction goes from page 217 to 252 in the Illuminations book. This is mainly what these references are saying. And then comes the differences that we were also discussing in the server, special assignment, quotation, parentheses, references, what the hell are all those stuff? So let's go one by one. Quotation. A quotation is a full transcript of something found in a book. So we have actually an example here. Those are the parts that you actually take from the author and write like exactly as it is in the edition you have in hands. You can put that in the middle of your text, and then it comes in quotation marks. But if it's bigger than 3 lines, then it has to be detached from the main text and like a paragraph space. Normally I use a tab, but this is not specified in CGL's parameters. So actually it just has to be detached from the text and with a paragraph space, but you can put a tab or you can do it the way you think it looks better. But the whole idea is it really detaches from the main body of text. That's only if it's bigger than 3 lines. If it's smaller, it comes in the middle of the text, like I said. And it's normally in a smaller font if it's detached as well. So what I use is 12 for the main body text, and when it's detached like this, I use 10. This is also not specified in CGL's parameters. It just says it has to be detached. But I use it because this is Harvard referencing system, and this is also the system I used to use in Brazil. You're free to use whatever you want, but just remember it has to be detached from the text. This is a quotation. So next thing, a paraphrase or paraphrase. So this is a little more complicated to explain, but it's really easy to understand. It's first of all, it's also known as a citation. So this might be confusing because paraphrase, citation are synonyms, so they're the same thing. And the thing here is they are not the same words the author used. It's your reiteration of them. So it's something like when you're writing and you say, this can also be read in Simon's work about programming for games. Like this is a reference, you would have a footnote showing where Simon ever said that or written about that, but it's not a quotation. Like you didn't take Simon's word exactly as they are and put it in your work, you're just reiterating that. And sometimes this can go for a while, you can even explain. So for example, Sherry Turkle made an essay about people on muds, and in this essay she concluded, and then you go back to your own words. This is also a paraphrase, and you should also have like a footnote or a reference saying where she said all that. But yeah, you didn't say that, Simon. It was just an example. But this is the difference between a quotation and a paraphrase or a citation, because here for the citation or the paraphrase, you're just reiterating what somebody said. You're not using the exact words that the person used, and this is the difference. Both of them must be referenced though, so you're not excused to say the exact word where people said that because you're paraphrasing them, but you don't have to use all the things about putting quotation marks and everything. The reason to use one or other is only style. So it's a choice of style. It's because you decide that in that moment it looks better for your work. But don't worry, like there's not a rule when to use one or when to use the other. It's when you feel better to do each or one or another. And it comes in the middle of the main text with the same font size, of course, because it's still you writing. Then the reference itself, which is what we discussed before. It's the literal reference to the work you are using. In the CGL system, it comes always in footnotes, so like here, and in smaller fonts. So this is another thing that can be confusing because some people say, oh, I'll add the references later, as we talked before. If by reference they're saying only this, like only the reference itself where they took from, then it's not a problem. This you can add later. But if they're talking about this, the quotation and the parentheses, then it's a problem because this has to be there from the beginning. This is part of what you're writing. You have to think your essay already with those. Those here are just the references that you can add later. Those are okay to add later, especially if you already have them written somewhere, because this is just let's say formatting. And then you have the reference list. Reference list is like, it comes in the end of your work, it's after the conclusion, and it has a list of everything you use there. So here in this example, you have all the scholarly references, and then you have film, and then you have games, and then you have attachments. So it's really everything you use. Those are not counting for the word count because those are there literally only for reference. They're a full list. Here you don't need to use the pages. So remember here that we said, for example, we had the pages where Walter Benjamin work was on that book, or sometimes you have a specific quotation like here, and then you have to say this quotation is on page 23 of that book. So for these examples, you really need the pages for that. Here in the main reference list, you don't need the pages because those are just the works, like the books or the papers or the journals that you use. And here you don't need to use pages. You only need a full work reference. And they must be presented in alphabetical order. This is important because sometimes you might have many works from the same author. So of course that author will be coming the same name, and then you have to look for the next thing on that reference that might be like the name of the book, and put that in alphabetical order. So you just pay attention so that everything is in alphabetical order here. Before we get to the next, just something I forgot, or I didn't. No, I didn't. I'll talk about it later. It's okay. And then we have an epigraph. Epigraph, it's these things I've been using on my slides initiating every session of this presentation. And they're a short quotation. It does not need to be from an academic source. So here you can use anything. Normally, it doesn't even have a reference the way the other things have. See here in the example, it's just Ernest Hemingway. You don't need to put the full reference for those. Because the purpose of an epigraph is just to show something that inspired your writing. It normally comes in the beginning or the end of the work, and it doesn't need to be in the main reference list as well. So this is like something you just put there to say, yeah, this is like inspiring. It's like when you have a presentation or you write a card to someone, and in the cover of the card, you have like this famous or motivational line. It's the same thing. So this is really common. For example, I even used the Bible for something like that in Jonas' essay. It was kind of a joke, but I did. And the reason to do that is only to show that inspired your work or that has something to do with your work. But don't worry about making it a scholarly source or referencing to it, because normally it comes from fiction, it comes from movies, it comes from anything that has nothing to do with science itself. So this is simpler to do, and it's really common, especially for thesis. Then there's like a bonus track here, and this is where I'm going to talk about the stuff that I thought I had forgotten. So games, film, and media articles have a specific way of being referred to. It's simpler than what we said before about authors, but in CGL they have a specific way. So check it. It's normally like the title for film, the title and the director and the year. For games, it's like the title. It's called originator, so you have to put normally the publisher or all the designers and the year. So there's a rule for that, but just check it. It's simple, and we might have to use it many times. The first time, this is also CGL system, the first time you refer to an author or work in your essay, you must put the complete reference in a footnote. And this is really CGL or TEHA stuff. This is not common in the other systems, and I think this is the main difference. So especially for people who might work in the future with other systems, remind of always doing that. So first time I use, for example, Benjamin, I have to put the full references. So the author, the book, the place it was published, the publisher, and the year, plus the page I'm using, the first time I used it. Then later on, I can just put Benjamin and the year and the page I'm using. But the first time always have to come with everything. And this is something I also were talking to some people in the last essay, and some of them didn't know it. So let's say you just used Benjamin, and then 2 paragraphs later you use Benjamin again. It's just like the next footnote. It will be immediately below the first footnote, also by Benjamin. Then you don't have to repeat everything again. You just write it, ibit. This is idem, ibit, and it's like Latin words that means exactly as above. So you just use exactly as above and write only the page. So it, ibit, page, in this case 7. This is really common and expected. It doesn't have to do with CGL system. This is just like scholarly writing, so you can use it as much as you want. Just remember that if between those footnotes you had another author, then you have to refer to the author again, because it will be referring to the note, to the footnote immediately above. And don't freak out about all this too much. This is really important. Like, this is something you can even pay somebody to correct for you, and it's not wrong to do. I know a lot of people who write their PhD thesis and just send to someone to do all this referencing shit. What is important, like I said, is this here. So the quotations, they're part of the writing, so write already with them. The paraphrases are important, all this. So the main body of text is very important. This is like your ideas, this is what you're doing. The references themselves, even like I know we're being graded for them, but they're just details. I can help you with that, other people can help you with that. It's just formatting. It's taking the information you already have and putting that information into a specific format. So don't freak out too much about that. It's not the most important thing for any essay or any scientific paper. It's not the core of your work. That's the summary of it. Before we end here, there's one more thing I would like to say, and this, yeah, I forgot, and it comes here. Just going back on the presentation to show where it was. Yeah, when we talk about the academic sources, there's a thing called filing, and I really recommend you to do that because Gundolf already said he expects us to do that for the reading. This is what he calls like careful reading. Every time you start to read a book you think you might be able to use in your future works, do this. Like I have this in my computer. You do a file for that book. First thing you write is like the reference, exactly like you would put in your essay, because then you can just Control-C, Control-V when you're going to use. So you write the full reference there. And then for every quotation of the book you think you might be able to use, while you're reading, you write that quotation and you put the pages. Then in the future, when you have to write an essay, you remember, oh, there's that book I read. Oh, there's me. I think you're not muted. Can I mute him from here? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. If you have those documents, you can just Control-C, Control-V. Many of the essays I wrote this semester, I had already the file for the things because I read during the closed reading groups. And I literally did that. So I went there. I had, let's say, page 14, something I already knew I could use. I just Control-V, Control-C there, and then the main reference that is title of the file. This is really common for academic research. Normally, a research, before it used to be a real like physics file that they used to carry around, but now you can just have a folder in your computer with all those filings and just go back to them as you need. Of course, for example, in the future, you might find out that you want to research something different and you don't have the quotation, but still you will have the full reference of the book and you can just go back to it. You will remember where stuff are and find information you need. So this is really useful, and I really recommend you from now on, when reading academic stuff, to file it that way because it helps a lot in the future. And this is also why you have the impression that I'm writing really fast with that, but it's not that I'm writing fast, it's because I already have those things separated before when I read the books or the papers or whatever. And like that's pretty much what I had to present here today. So yeah, now I would like to listen to you if you have any questions, especially people who came in later. So yeah, what's troubling you, my dear? Say whatever you want to ask now.